everyone. Welcome, everyone. I'm pleased to see that there is more than 150 people connected this afternoon. It's a working afternoon for the BVZD-ABDH, Association Belge des Directeurs d'Hôpitaux, with GUBERNA. We planned this meeting more than a year and a half ago. It was before COVID. It was a time where hospital networks were in discussion, and then COVID was here. COVID crisis was also really challenging for hospitals and for hospital governance and hospital partnership and connection between themselves. So I'm really pleased today to introduce 4 speakers from Belgium and around. So we have from GUBERNA, Ewout and Corentin. GUBERNA is the Belgian Institute of Governance, and they will give us an insight about good governance. And as I understood, they also did a symposium not a few days ago, I mean not very far from, from today, about co-governance with physicians. And this is really important because I know that there is a lot of doctors, physicians that are really connected with us today. Then we have Vidal Seegobin from London, and he is a senior consultant at Advisory Board International. Advisory Board follows hospital governance since years, and they really work and try to find out what are the good elements, the good behaviors to have in order to facilitate partnership between hospitals. And I'm really looking forward to hear what they have to say. We also have Antares Consulting, and it's Stéphane Legrand from Paris who will be presenting their vision about hospital networks in Belgium, but also they know very well the Belgium environment and the Belgian financing system for hospitals. So they might have some clues in order to improve, or maybe not, our hospital governance in Belgium. And last and but not least, Dr. Michel Nathan, who was CEO of a hospital in Luxembourg, and he joined us today in person. He is also board member of the European Association of Healthcare Managers. He will share with us his experience as a leader, and he will put in, let's say, in comparison, or maybe he will give us an insight about governance viewed by a leader. So it will be leadership through governance. And then at the end, we will have a small panel discussion with questions that you could also write down on the web, on the YouTube channel and other connected channels, and we will share them with the speakers. So it's gonna be run. We have 4 speakers, something like 30 minutes for everyone. Is this correct? And welcome on behalf of all the BVZD-ABDH board. I am really pleased to have you with us today. Corentin and Wout, please.
Hello. Hello, hello. The sound is good? Yes. Okay, perfect. Thank you. As introduced by Gilbert, we are Ewout and Corentin, and we are working at GUBERNA, and we'll talk about the hospital governance. Just before beginning, a few words briefly about GUBERNA. The purpose of GUBERNA is better board, better organization, better world. The mission of our organization is to promote good governance in all kinds of organization. So as you can see, we have a segmented, tailor-made approach with several centers. Of course, the governance is not exactly the same in listed company, in SME, in public, etc. About the Hospital Governance Center, we have a specific action only for this center. First of all, we have some dedicated service. Basically, we do board evaluation, network governance scan, in company trainings, etc. We have some events. We participate to some events like today, and also the Hospital Governance Forum, like explained by Gilbert. We have also some dedicated education program tools and some specific action like sounding boards on study reports with the Minister de Bloc and also link with universities.
Good afternoon, everyone, also from my side. We will share now with you the basic building blocks of governance in general, of course making thereafter the link more specifically to hospital governance, which is fundamentally different from the governance of most listed companies or other organizations. To begin with, the definition of good governance. What is good governance? The definition was first developed in the context of major corporate failures or corporate scandals with the famous Cadbury Code, which defined good governance in essence as the system by which companies are directed and controlled. Now, a lot of developments happened, of course. Governance insights grew, and this definition was changed. And nowadays, most people refer to, you see his picture here, the famous King Code originating from South Africa, which defines governments as ethical leadership, ethical and effective leadership. And then, of course, implying that ethical and effective leadership means that the governance of an organization strives to these 4 points put forward here on the slide today. Of course, to begin with an ethical culture. And what does that mean? Which values, what is the decision making, the behavior, the interaction, on what values are these based? What is considered to be the distinction between good and bad? Of course, performance, obviously the achievement of certain strategic objectives that have been put forward by the different governance bodies of the organization in interaction with each other, of course, but also the impact on internal capital and the external context, which is an element that has been added in recent years. The impact not only on financial performance, on shareholder value, but, and that is even more relevant, of course, for the hospital sector, the impact on the external environment, stakeholders, etc. And then lastly, of course, legitimacy, referring to the fact that organizations need to have a license to operate. They cannot just do whatever. They need to have a certain legitimacy within society. Then following this, there are, of course, a number of essential building blocks that apply to all organizations, including hospitals. One of our basic sayings is that one size does not fit all, so the governance need to be adapted to the kind of organization, but nevertheless, there are a number of essential building blocks. The first one, of course, is that there's no single person that can do everything in the organization, which means that the first principle is that the organization needs to ensure a certain kind of appropriate and effective delegation of authority. Following from that, of course, is that the delegation that follows needs to be matched with appropriate accountability via reporting. And the metaphor or the image that we often use to make this clear is the idea of the cascade. So powers are delegated from the General Assembly towards the board, towards the daily management, but in the opposite direction, there needs to be accountability on how these powers that have been delegated are being put into practice, etc. So reporting is very important, financial reporting, but of course also non-financial reporting, etc. The following building block, of course, checks and balances. This means that sufficient checks and balances need to be there. Each power needs to be counterbalanced. All powers cannot be centralized in one person or in one organ. They need to be spread. Each power needs to have a counterpower. And for example, this means that in an organization, the function of the president of the board of directors is split from the function of the CEO. So checks and balances. The following, of course, is that governance aims at an objective and professional decision making in the interest of the company. The idea is not to put forward certain particular interests that belong to a certain actor. No, always decisions need to be made in the general interest of the company. Following from that, of course, is that each organization needs to be able to deal in an effective and professional manner with possible conflicts of interest that might arise. This happens in each organization. Always there will be conflicts of interests. The point is to deal with them in a professional manner and to be able to, in one way or another, align these often very diverse interests that might occur. And that's why we oftentimes call governance the art of aligning interests, precisely to point to this idea and this fact. And then lastly, of course, is that all this needs to happen in a context of transparency in all directions, from the board towards management, but also from management toward the board, from the board towards the members of the organization, etc. And we often use there the very telling saying that sunshine is the best of all disinfectants. And then, of course, what is hospital governance? The way by which powers and organizational processes are managed to achieve the mission and societal impact of in the collective interests of all stakeholders. And this is a term very important in a social context and a hospital context, the interest of the stakeholders. Also in the private sector, we see more and more, as I mentioned before, the idea to move from not only shareholder capitalism towards stakeholder capitalism, that the organization also has a certain responsibility towards the society at large. Of course, in a social and a hospital context, this is more obvious. They strive towards quality for patients, etc., more than achieving certain purely financial objectives. And then, of course, good governance, it's not just something that you want to achieve an end by itself. No, it's of course a means to achieve certain objectives, and a number of them are listed here on the slide. And objective and informed decision making, more easy access towards investments, oftentimes because of this increased legitimacy, etc. Then these two short slides quickly. All this happens, of course, in a certain framework to begin with, the legal framework, the different legal initiatives that have been taken over the years. Of course, specifically the law on hospitals, the new wetboek van verenigingen en verroodschappen that introduced a number of important changes at the legal level. For example, specifying this importance of bringing into an optimal equilibrium these financial and social objectives of an organization. And then lastly, and we will refer to it afterwards, the law of 2019, which stipulates that hospitals need to organize themselves in these local clinical hospital networks, inside regions, and this brings, of course, a number of very specific challenges. Then, of course, the articles of association of the organization, they are, of course, the reference text concerning governance. And then, of course, there is what we could call, or what is commonly called, soft law, the governance recommendations. And in Belgium, there are two reference codes, the hospital governance recommendations, and then the aanbeveling goed bestuur en welzijn in zorgorganisaties, which has been developed at the regional level in Flanders by Minister Van Deurzen. And then, of course, the organization can also have certain internal documents that accompany the articles of association to specify certain measures, and this comes forward from the idea that governance is about power, distributing power, and also employing it afterwards, and certain instruments can be used to bring some kind of structure in this whole process, of which, of course, the governance charters offer an additional source next to the article of associations, and they offer, of course, added flexibility to implement a governance that is adapted to the specific organization.
Yes. Now let's have a few words about the governance model in the hospital sector. As you maybe know, the classic, the corporate governance tripod for all company is composed by a tripod that is composed by the board of directors, the management, and the shareholders or the members. As you will see, the hospital governance have also tripod, but much complex. Indeed, the inclusiveness of stakeholders, mainly the doctors, with the medical council is very essential, but bring also a complexity of the model. Of course, the network brings more complexity about the tripod of governance, but we will talk about that later. To organize your own governance model, it should be important to think about a few things, and we like to advise you to work in 2 steps. The step 1 is to question yourself about the bodies that are there and what weight do you want to give to each bodies. Of course, you will need to take into account the legal aspects, but do not be afraid to go beyond the legal aspect and be creative in the weight you give to each body. The second question is how do you organize the delegation? Who is exactly responsible for what? And how do you organize the accountability? Also, who supervise whom is also important, and how to organize it. The step 2 is composed by 3 questions. The first one, maybe it's a little bit too obvious for you, but trust me, is not always the case. The first question is that the model is enough clear for all governance actors, because we often see in the reality some hospital build a lot of really complex governance model, and everybody does not understand all cascade de delegation like explained by Görtz. The second question is to question yourself about what works and what doesn't work. Don't be afraid to evaluate on a regularly based your body, and maybe to change a few things, to adapt yourself. As we often say, governance is a journey, so you really can move on and change the way of work. Finally, a third really important thing is to find the right balance between power and counterpower. Of course, it's a delicate challenge, but it's really important. When you give some power, you need to organize a counterpower, of course. And to finish, as also said by Ewout, one size does not fit all. So you don't have to make a copy-paste of a really efficient model, but please organize your own model that reflects your culture, your way of work, the interaction between the several actors, etc.
Yeah, as mentioned beforehand, one of the most important recent developments, apart maybe from the obvious COVID-19 crisis, is the law of 2019, which specifies that hospitals need to organize themselves in networks. So quickly, a short word on these networks. We organize biannually at GUBERNA our hospital governance forum with practitioners from the field to debate these kind of questions. And last year, of course, we devoted a session on the COVID-19 crisis and the role that these hospital networks played in that context. One central conclusion was that the hospital networks came too late, actually, to deal in an appropriate manner with the COVID-19 crisis, or put differently, that the crisis came too early for these networks. So everything is still at the beginning. These networks are taking shape, meaning that the fact that something takes shape legally doesn't mean that also in practice it quickly takes shape. And these networks are formed. These are very difficult discussions. Hospitals need to join each other in a network, but there may be differences between these hospitals and in their size, their purpose, etc. And very important decisions will have to be made, etc. So we see that really these networks, even though that the law dates from 2019, they are still in full development. Nevertheless, the COVID-19 crisis has shown that new partnerships have been created on very specific operational topics that clearly demonstrated to these hospitals and to these networks the added value of working together, which in turn obviously improved their legitimacy both internally and externally. Furthermore, we also see that in many cases, trust between the different hospitals within a network has been increased due to COVID because of more intense contacts and more informational exchange. Of course, and we come back to this very important point later on, doctors also need to play a very important role in the setup of these networks. They are possibly, arguably, because of course patients are the ultimate goal of a hospital, but they are at least one of the most important stakeholders of the hospital, so they need to have their role to play, their responsibility in setting up the network itself. And of course, in setting up the network medical council, which is specified by the law, that not only in individual hospitals, but also at network level, a medical council needs to be formed. And that allows me to immediately make the bridge towards the last aspect of our presentation, the role of doctors in hospital governance towards a co-governance approach. everyone knows that hospitals need to set up a medical council which has specific advisory rights, and this is very important that they only have advisory rights. These medical councils, they don't have decision-making power. So hospitals need to set up these medical councils, but we see that actually the law that stipulates the formation of these medical councils displays what we call a flaw, because the necessary coordination between these doctors, which are often independent enterprises, they are not employed by the hospital. Thus the necessary coordination between these independent doctors on the one hand, and on the other hand, the hierarchically structured hospital, as explained already, this delegation of power between the General Assembly, the Board of Directors, and management, that this coordination between these two poles only takes place through this advisory right stipulated in the law. And this means that only in very generic fields, such as everyone working in hospitals will know, that the general agreement, the financial agreement, there this advisory right and this interaction coordination between the hospital itself, so the board and the management and the doctors, that really takes shape concretely. But in many other cases, this coordination, this consultation takes place more on an ad hoc level. And the idea then is that this results in a very complex and very slow decision-making process, because it turns out to be more of a permanent negotiation process between doctors and between the hospital. And that's why in recent times this concept of co-governance, this new buzzword, has been developed. Of course, it's important before we delve into putting this principle into practice. It's important to reflect, what is co-governance? Because we can talk about it, we can strive towards it, but we need to know, of course, what it exactly is and what it is not. And in essence, co-governance is cooperative and collegial governance. This means, first of all, of course, co-decision. This means that doctors also will have a say in the governance of the hospital, but it goes much further. It means also co-responsibility. Co-responsibility for the hospital governance, not only in implementing an open debate culture and in taking collegial decisions that are taken in consensus and are defended afterwards towards what we call in Dutch the achterban, the people behind them. And this is very important. These decisions, they need to be defended. If doctors get a say in hospital governance, they also need to realize the responsibility they have and the leadership they have to defend the decisions that have been taken together towards the achterban, as we say in Dutch. Co-governance is, of course, also about building a basis of trust and a culture of open consultation and transparency. Taking part into decisions, and it's also visualized here on the slide, also means delving into the subject. And formulating constructive proposals towards the management, towards the board of directors. It also means really committing to a collegial consultation, so not a confrontational consultation, but really collegial consultation, striving towards decisions that are made in consensus in the interest of the hospital. And of course, it implies also a constructive debate, steering towards a professional decision-making process in consensus. We cannot stress this enough. Co-governance, of course, develops first and foremost from a coalition of the willing, people who really want to put themselves behind this idea of co-governance between the hospital and its doctors. But of course, it should be more than a coalition of the willing. Really, all actors involved need to put themselves behind this idea and strive towards putting it into practice. Then on this slide, we would like to share with you a number of best practices that we identified also in conversations with the field. And we see that this co-governance approach has been implemented in practice in a number of different ways. Point of departure is, of course, to align the governance system, as I explained already many times. On the one hand, and the governance system, management, board of directors, and on the other side, the clinical system, the whole medical staff and everything that comes with it. First of all, it's important to state that processes, principles, etc. are a very necessary condition in implementing co-governance, and I come back to that afterwards. But it is not enough to ensure collegial decision-making, to ensure professional governance, etc. So a priority for each hospital should be, first and foremost, to make sure that everyone is dedicated to this co-governance idea and to this professional governance behavior. And that means, first and foremost, that decisions are taken departing from the totality of interests of the hospital and not from promoting one's own interests, etc. So the general interest should always prevail on particular individual interests that might exist from specific medical departments, etc. This also means, of course, that, and it's one of the building blocks that I mentioned before, that an appropriate policy to deal with possible conflicts of interest is instated in the hospital, and that they are dealt with in a professional manner. And then to really promote and stimulate this professional governance behavior, the consciousness and the leadership, the sense of responsibility of all actors involved. And many hospitals, they organize certain specific education programs, informative sessions, to really inform all actors involved. So the doctors themselves, the board members themselves, the members of the management team themselves, to inform them on this governance idea and what it means to have this professional governance behavior. Secondly, of course, I think this will be clear to all. Any governments that seeks to ensure the continuation, the future of the organization that departs from the development of an appropriate strategy. This is paramount, and strategy is really at the heart of the viability of the organization, or in this case, the hospital. So this means, of course, that doctors need to be involved also in the process of strategy making and developing the strategy of the hospital and the specific objectives that go with it. And of course, doctors, they have the expertise and they have a very clear view of the strategic context of their department. So it's very important that they get involved in the strategy process and that they don't just take note of decisions that have already been made by the management and the board of directors, but that they really come with creative ideas and proposals towards the management and the board of directors, so they're really involved in it. Furthermore, this strategic involvement can also strengthen the commitment of doctors towards the hospital, also ensure their cooperation and really develop their motivation to really work together with all actors involved for a better strategy of the hospital through ensuring a more constructive and rich discussion, creating more mutual understanding if these strategic decisions and strategic discussions are taken in consultation. And of course, this all towards the goal of the best possible strategy of the hospital. Now, in practice, we see that several hospitals implement this strategic role of the doctors and their role in the strategic governance of the hospital via what we call a tripartite consultation group, which means a group with representatives both from the doctors, for example, a representation from the medical council, then of course a representation of the board of directors and a representation of the management, so that in the context of these tripartite consultations they develop strategy. And you can have a very basic setup that the doctors in this tripartite plays a role in the preparation of the strategy, but of course it can go much further where this tripartite also plays a role in the implementation of the strategy and the follow-up that results from it. And of course, this tripartite can have a very broad global agenda to discuss general strategic trends and other, or they can have a very specified agenda where they will discuss very concrete strategic issues and strategic files. Next to, of course, an important strategic role of doctors in the hospital governance, which can take shape via this tripartite, hospital doctors can also be involved very concretely via a seat in the board of directors of the hospital. And two options are possible there, and we see them implemented in practice as well, all of them, so not just one of them. On the one hand, these doctors that are seated in the board of directors, they can be external, so external from the hospital. They have no mandate within the hospital. They are not working in the hospital, but they come from another hospital, or they are maybe even not a doctor themselves, but a person with a certain expertise that doctors deem necessary to seat on the board. And so external people, of course, appointed by the medical council, but external people that are not active in the hospital. And there's then two sub-options. It can be an observator, a person that is present in the board, that also receives all information, but is not really a board member. So this means they don't have a voting right, etc. And then another option, of course, is that this external representative of the doctors in the board of directors is really a board member and has a voting right. Then the second option, of course, is that this representative of the doctors in the board of directors is an internal doctor, so someone active within the hospital. It can be a member of the medical council or someone elected from the whole medical staff. Excuse me. And this doctor then, of course, can have again two roles, be it a real board member with voting rights, or just an observator, as mentioned before, who is present at board meetings but doesn't vote, doesn't really have real decision-making power. Of course, if the hospital chooses for an internal doctor in its board of directors, these people will be placed in a very, very difficult position. One need to be conscious of that. On the one hand, he will have to take part in the collegial decision-making of the board of directors. As mentioned before, the board is a collegial decision-making body that takes decisions in consensus. So he will have to defend the interests or the decisions made by the board. But on the other hand, there's also expectations towards this person from the broader medical staff. So this person, this internal doctor, can be in a very, very difficult position between two fires. On the one hand, the board and his responsibilities towards the board, but also his responsibilities towards the broader medical staff. And so that's why some hospitals opt to choose for an external person who feels this tension, this conflict of interest even less than if this doctor is internal to the hospital. And then it's also mentioned on the slide, apart from the board of directors, doctors, as one of the main stakeholders of the organization, can of course also or should be even involved in the General Assembly. So having a seat at the General Assembly, which has an additional added value because the Board of Directors takes decisions in consensus, while in the General Assembly decisions are made via voting and not in consensus, which means that these conflicts of interest, these tensions between the interests I mentioned before play less in the General Assembly. There they can really assert their opinion. They don't need to come to a consensus because votes will be taken. And then, of course, and we see this in practice oftentimes, very crucial in implementing this co-governance approach in hospitals as this bridge function of the chief medical officer, the hoofdarts in Dutch, which really is the linking pin, the go-between between the medical staff, the medical council, and the hierarchically organized hospital with its board of directors and its management. So we cannot stress enough the importance of this person and its function. That's also why oftentimes this person is present in all consultation bodies. So, for example, he or she follows half an hour in the medical council. He's present in the board of directors. He's obviously also part of the management team, etc., to really assert this bridging function. And of course, as mentioned already before, one size does not fit all. The hospital should always try to choose the option that suits the strategy, suits the context of the hospital, etc. And then lastly, of course, we listed a number of lessons learned from our Hospital Governance Forum that took place last week, where we discussed with hospitals and got testimonials from them on how they implement a co-governance approach. First of all, of course, as mentioned before, this co-decision needs to go hand in hand with the co-responsibility. These doctors really need a sense of responsibility towards the hospital. This means they need to defend the decisions taken in these co-decision groups, and also need to show leadership. They really need to have these leadership skills, communication and negotiation skills. Very important, and we refer here to the strategic role of the board of doctors, is of course that you need to stimulate their entrepreneurial spirit. This really has an added value for the hospital in developing and executing its strategy. That's also why a best practice is to, for example, ensure a diversified medical council with people from different disciplines, different ages, etc., to really represent this entrepreneurial spirit. Then, of course, as mentioned before, the important role of the chief medical officer as a linking pin, who also ensures a transparent information flow between the different governance bodies, as he is oftentimes, as mentioned, present in all of them. Of course, co-governance also requires a continuous coordination between interests in ups and downs. We see that in certain times this co-governance, this consultation between the doctors and the hospital happens really in a positive and constructive manner, while at other times or in specific situations there might be increased tensions and more a confrontational approach instead of a cooperative approach. So one has to realize that it goes with ups and downs. This is unavoidable. Of course, we listed a number of very practical, concrete structures and processes that can be implemented. For example, this tripartite consultation concerning strategy, or the presence of a doctor in the board of directors. But one should never underestimate, of course, the importance of informal contact. In the hospital, board members or members of the management team can meet doctors, have a quick chat, etc. So this really contributes to co-governance, this informal consultation. As mentioned, internal doctors in the board of directors perform an extremely difficult balancing act between their role as a board member and being part of a collegial decision-making body, while in the other hand, of course, having to represent the interests of the medical staff. Almost done. Building a network without involving doctors makes it very difficult and very vulnerable. We saw this in practice in a hospital in the south of Belgium, where this network formation, the setup of this network was mainly a political decision with no involvement of the doctors, which means that there is no draagvlak, as we say in Dutch, and which makes it very difficult to implement the network, which is already something very sensitive, where difficult decisions need to be made. And then lastly, to end our intervention, one very essential sentence that should really be the raison d'être of a co-governance approach is the distinction between acteur ou auditeur. Do we want really a co-decision-making role of doctors, a really active role in development of the strategy, or do we just want them as an auditeur to just approve decisions that have already been made, and in which they didn't really have a say. And then I said lastly, but no, there is one last point. Beyond the processes, beyond the structures, beyond concrete consultation groups that are being set up, one should always remember that it all boils down to the people that fill in the positions, the people that bring these structures and these processes alive. You can have the best governance, but if you have personalities that don't bring it to practice and don't bring it to fraternity, you will never achieve co-governance. So the human factor is very important. It always stays something between people and between personalities, and no matter the structures or processes that you install.
Yes. Basically, general conclusion. You can read the slide, but there is two big ideas. The first one is to go beyond the law, the hospital law, because there is many flaws, and so involve the doctors in the strategic reflection, because we have seen in the grant they have a lot of added value. So really don't be afraid to include them in the strategic reflection. The last reflection is a nice quote from a director that may make an intervention on the past week. He says that about the co-governance. To be efficient and efficacious, the co-governance need to be understood as the co-creation. And I think the co-creation is really nice leitmotif. To finish, just a nice quote. Don't be afraid, because we have used a lot of fancy concepts, etc. But good governance, the governance is only doing the right things, doing things right, and at the right time. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ewout. Thank you, Corentin. So that was a great introduction about Belgian situation. And I heard how governance is trying to adapt to our situation and to our law. I would like to hear what our international invitees would say about how to adapt maybe our law and our functionality in Belgium to another way of doing it. I would like to hear some ideas about patient and citizen empowerment, and also maybe about how governance can help transformation of care delivery. Vidal, the floor is yours, and pleased to have you with us today.
Thank you everyone for joining virtually on this very topical question in healthcare right now. Even before the pandemic, I think we were trying to understand how do we make decisions and coordinate more complex organizations. And I think in the pandemic, and as we navigate out of the pandemic, that complexity, both in terms of our organizations, as well as the environment that we are going to operate in, are going to be even more complex than ever. So I'll try to make up some time here, but I wanted to just share that this question that you've talked about right now within the Belgian context is also a very live and real question in health systems around the world. It is no surprise that over a number of years, multiple governments, funding initiatives, and technology changes, healthcare has become an increasingly complex sector of society, and increasingly the kinds of patients that we are seeing are not helped by that complexity, but are in fact hurt by that complexity. And the result from a governmental or from a payer's perspective is, in addition to those outcomes clinically being suboptimal, we are spending a lot more money on healthcare than I think we would desire, particularly as we think about all the priorities within society that we need to address and fix over a shorter and shorter period of time. Which is exactly why Belgium is not the only country that is thinking about the creation of networks or cooperatives between independent organizations. This is happening in England, this is happening in Finland and Denmark, and it is a very live question that I think a lot of the insights that our colleagues in GUBERNA just pointed to that are going to be increasingly important over time. But the one thing I wanted to say, which I think is an echo of the message that our colleagues just shared a moment ago, is that the ability to make decisions as a cooperative, as a network, is as much a human problem as it is a legal or a technical problem. And what do I mean by that is that when we talk about what we're trying to achieve as networks, we're talking about finding the ability to finding scale, finding standards, sharing evidence, restructuring where people access care, and hopefully even reorienting the health system to be one that supports wellness as opposed to simply treating sickness. Now, those all sound great on paper, but when it comes to decision making, when it comes to taking action, it becomes increasingly difficult to do that when we are a coalition of the willing, as our colleagues just said a moment ago, but the coalition is going to benefit, but I'm going to lose. We can make a decision that will help a lot of people, but I'm going to have to be the one that will take the loss. And as you would imagine, those kinds of decisions, those kinds of actions are incredibly challenging to overcome. And it's not something that a technical solution can help make people comfortable with. A legal remedy is not going to always be the best solution for those kinds of problems. And for that reason, we want to talk a lot about how do we make those decisions in a governmental structure, recognizing that our bias or our instinct here is to create reporting structures and discussion groups. And as you would imagine, what helps there is that everyone can feel like they are part of the decision-making process. Everyone can feel like they have a seat at the table, and everybody has visibility and the ability to keep others accountable for the decisions that we might make together. The downside is the more people you bring around the table, the more varied the perspectives, goals, and intentions of those seated around the table, the more difficult it is to make decisions. If every single individual weighs in with equal amount into the decision-making process, then you can very quickly imagine a whole host of decisions that become increasingly complex to make because nobody wants to feel the loss or experience the pain that might be associated with more complex decisions. And what I really liked about the presentation that we just saw a moment ago is they highlighted a point that we have found in our global research as well, is that your governance structure should first and foremost be optimized towards making decisions. And the second is that when you're thinking about the question of who should be making the decisions, our overall guidance is that it should be allocated to the party, committee, or entity that is best situated to make the most informed and accurate decision with information available. In some cases, that means that the decision should be much higher within the organization. So things like the overall strategy, identity, values of the organization that we are creating. And in some cases, what that might mean is that decisions should be devolved to the level closest to the patient. So who has visibility into how we deliver care? Who has the best evidence in terms of what works and what doesn't? And how do we empower those individuals to make those decisions effectively with as least amount of friction and most authority as possible? So one thing I wanted to share, because that is very theoretical, is the idea of how we talk about that at the highest levels of the organization to ensure that they get cascaded across every unit that needs to cooperate and work in unison towards making those decisions successful. And I wanted to take this example that comes from Wales, which is in the United Kingdom, which operates a health board. So you think about a mega structure of what you might be considering in Belgium when it comes to the hospital networks. And the chief executive here said to himself that there are two elements that are related to the strategy and direction of this very complex healthcare entity that we are trying to build and navigate. There is the overall destination that we are trying to head towards, and then there are the paddle strokes that we are going to make to direct the boat around challenges in troughs or places that are easier to glide through towards heading that goal. The goal, the destination, is very, very fuzzy and will become clearer over time, but the paddle strokes we make within the boat are much more clear, are much more defined, and are also very time-bound and finite. And so a lot of those individual paddle strokes are what allow for us to meet that goal or that destination over time. And what I like again about what this organization did, their name is Hywelda, so that's Hywelda, that is a health board within Wales, is they construct a series of groups that set strategy, cascade strategy, and deliver strategy across their very large organization. And I would consider that at the broadest level as something that is worth considering how you set up your boards and the relationships to the executors or the managers of those different plans as a key component of what governance does and how it does it well. So the last area I wanted to just talk about very briefly, I think connects more closely with this idea of how do we make the boards that we build more effective at their job. So there is a term in business literature called VUCA, which is V-U-C-A, and it reflects the volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity of the environment and decisions that we have to make. And I think if nothing else, a pandemic really does underline how the world that we operate within healthcare is very VUCA. It's also something worth noting to say that while we talk about the evolution of boards as structures we build or put in place to prevent bad things from happening, where we want to take those boards are to be structures that make good things happen, and specifically make solid, sound decisions with the best available evidence. And the truth of the matter is that while we can spend a lot of time studying boards in the abstract, what boards actually do on a day-to-day basis can be very complex, not necessarily obvious to everyone either participating in the board or observing the board, and can be highly technical and not necessarily fit for purpose for the kinds of VUCA-related decisions that I think we want these boards to make going forward. So I wanted to borrow a concept that I think is going to feel very common or hopefully comfortable for clinicians who we are asking increasingly to participate in these boards. And this is the idea of a top of license board. And what that concept means is that we describe an aspiration for the clinical workforce that talks about top of license performance, and extend that to the board, where each individual can make, rather than spending time doing something that could be done effectively by someone else, they are taking on the responsibilities that they are best situated to make and take on. And there's a couple of key tools that we have built within the advisory board that can be helpful on this front. And interestingly enough, where we have seen organizations do a really good job is not necessarily on assembling the right partners or assembling the right board participants. The truth of the matter is that across our organizations, we do have a lot of talent, varying expertise, deep technical expertise that can be brought together to make better decisions. The problems oftentimes are associated with processes, scoping, and the design of shorter decision-making sprints or activities that allow for us to make those decisions effectively. And so what I wanted to share with you is different ways that you can structure those conversations with your board, which can start at the highest level of abstraction, which could be, what do we want to be? What are we trying to deliver? And what would be the metrics of success that we would want to hold ourselves to account to? And it can cascade all the way down to, how do I get the board to help on this very specific challenge? What are the kinds of inputs I can give them in order to come to an effective decision? And what is the bounded and scoped decision that is going to be helpful and constructive to moving our organization forward? So the last thing I wanted to leave the audience with today is a reminder that the very first step that any organization looking to either optimize their existing board or build a new board is to take a pulse of how the current board structure performance is set up. And the advisory board has built a diagnostic across a series of questions that would allow for you to query how your board is set up across 7 key parameters, plus additional ones that you might want to assess against. And I found this, organizations have found this to be a very helpful tool in figuring out where they are and where they want to take their board. And I think a lot of the insights that GUBERNA has shared earlier about what those elements might look like will also be captured and reflected in some of those answers that you find. So thank you very much for your time and attention. I hopefully didn't go through the content too quickly, and hopefully we will be able to have a conversation about this work later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Vidal. You really helped us be on schedule again. So in light of what you shared with us, we're going to hear Stéphane from Antares Consulting, and he will try to answer if the Belgian hospital governance should be changed or not, and in light of what we should do this. Thank you, Stéphane, floor is yours.
Okay. I'm sorry for those who were waiting for this singing accent from Barcelona today. Unfortunately, I'm French, so you will just have my French accent today. The goal of my presentation today is to share with you experiences in some of our projects to redefine governance of institutions, or a project where we are working with governance members. To prepare this presentation, I called some partners from our different offices in Antares Consulting in Europe, and I asked them what are the main challenges in governance inside of your country for hospital. And their observations are almost the same. So I will try to give you this feedback today, but to put it inside of the Belgium context and market. So that means I will try to give you a pragmatic approach, which is not at all formal, not legal, or not academic, but only from our life experiences. To start, so there is no connotation or no judgment value in everything that I will say today. To start this little definition about governance, but Ewout and Corentin already said lots of things about it, so I won't lose time. But to start, I would like to say that governance for us is not only board of directors, and inside of this presentation, I won't talk about a board of directors. We think that governance, the concept of governance, is much more than it. So it's a short presentation in a complex and large topic, but I have these 3 key points today to discuss, to explain with you. And the first one is the mission. What are the mission, the composition, and nature of work of the governance? Why? Because too often there is a confusion inside of the concept. That's the difference. So what's the difference between governance and management? The best illustration of this difference is this driving school car. Inside, you have two pilots. One of them is driving. He tries to push the car to do all his best, to follow the road, to follow the good direction. That's why his head is in the handlebars. Sa tête est dans le guidon. And the other one, he supervises everything. He is looking, controlling the attitude of the driver, and you can see that the driver is stressed, he's sweating. And he makes sure that the speed and the direction are the right ones. He is responsible for preventing obstacles in the road, and he can suggest to the driver to change the method, to change the road, to change the direction. So, one drive, he manages, and the other one makes sure that good conduct is ensured to achieve the objective in an environment characterized by change, because the road changed. So the other one is the governance. Why did I explain that? Because too often, board of directors are in the decisions that concern how to do the things right and not how to do the right things. But governance is responsible for the final result. So the key subject of the governance is to support the management in monitoring the strategy and financial result. But do you know, in 20 years of being in Belgium with Antares Consulting, only in 2 projects governance were included from the beginning to the end of during all the session to define the strategy of the hospital. So that means in almost all the other projects, we arrive at the end with a report to see the board of directors and you say, this is the strategy. Are you agree with that or not? So is that a good practice? We don't think so. And if we have a look in the private sector, governance is inside of the institution. Companies that are listed on the stock exchange have governance at the heart of the institution. The president of the board of directors have his own office, his own secretary, and he follows day after day if we are doing the right things. So it's like in the driving school car. There is 2 pilots inside of the car, but with different missions. So some of you will tell me we cannot compare this kind of society, this kind of company with our hospital. But our hospital network I call important if we talk in terms of network. The average budget of a network in Belgium, it's around 750 million. And there is almost 10 networks which make more than 1 billion a year of budget. And if we have a look in the private company, in Belgium there is only 35 companies which are making more than 1 billion. And Microsoft, for example, in Belgium, it's 550 million budget a year. Given the equal size in a sector so important for the population, for the citizen, we should at least have the same level of requirement. So, composition and nature of work. What should it be for this board of directors? To do the right things, we should have an heterogeneous composition. It's needed in both in terms of discipline and perspective. That means we should have legal profile, real estate profile with analytical and strategic skill to give a vision to the institution, and profile of the civil society if we want to promote the community care, for example. However, some common denominators are necessary: the strategy outlook, the forward-looking capacity and the capacity to know how to manage major trends and how to include learning from other sectors. We are all talking about patient experience right now, but patient experience is coming from customer experience, so that's it. I don't know if there is lots of politicians right now who are connected with us. I don't have anything against you, but there is too much politician inside of our public institution, and there is too much ex-politician inside of private institution in Belgium. But finally, what do we prefer? What is the goal of the governance? Influence to obtain subsidies or avoid loss? And it will become even more important in the next year, because we are faced with major challenge, more integrated financing and a major transfer of risk to provider. Last Saturday, I was in Liège in the inauguration of Clinique CHC Montlégien, and Minister van der Broek confirmed again that they will have an important reform on the financing system in less than 2 years. And competition will increase because of the network. There is competition between network and inside of the network, between hospital, because we are talking about who will do what inside of this network for this hospital. So in this complex environment, the future is uncertain, which requires even more recruitment for governments. So network and governance are involved in this future. And Mr. Drucker, one of the Pope of management, said that the best way to predict future is to create it. And that's the mission of governance. So to summarize this first part, doing the right things, it's for management. Doing and governance must control that we are doing the right things. Governance must participate in defining strategy from the beginning to the end, and then monitor the management is following it well. We should not use too much politician inside of the governance to influence to obtain subsidies, but we should avoid loss, and we should have an heterogeneity in the profile inside of the board of directors. In this second point, I would like to talk about how we can integrate different kind of perspective inside of governance. There is a permanent debate about the presence or not about doctors inside of, and you talk about it, inside of governance. But they already have lots of space for that. They participate in all the different kind of commission inside of the hospital, outside of the hospital. The medical council even participate in the to decide who is going to be the next CEO. But at the end, they participate, but do not commit in the institution, and especially not in the final result. The board of directors has the final result. So there is a difference between participation and commitment, and we have this famous joke. In this image, to arrive to this final result, this beautiful breakfast with 2 eggs and this slice of bacon, the hen participates by giving eggs she's going to lay. But the pig, him, is giving its legs. So this is the differences between participation and commitment for doctors. So incorporate the perspective but not necessarily the people of the institution. We believe that we have to give this perspective inside of the governance, to give the perspective of the patient, but we don't need necessarily to put the patient association inside of governance. We have to incorporate the doctor's perspective, but not doctors from our institution. We have to integrate the perspective of collaborator, but not unions of professionals of the institution. Why? Because we need to defend the interest of the institution and not the interest of a group of patients, of doctors, or professional union. So to summarize this, this second part, what to do to have a good governance and to integrate this perspective. The first thing is commitment of all the stakeholders. Integrate the perspective of a group, not people from the institution, but their perspective. Defend the interest of the institution, and not defend my interest or the interest of a group. The third and last part of my presentation is the challenge of tomorrow for governance, and I will talk about networks, of course. To start this definition, this is what the law says. A local regional clinical hospital network, it's a collaboration with legal personality, lasting and legally formalized, approved by the competent authorities. But what the law doesn't say. What the law doesn't say what we take away from the governance of the hospital and what we give to the hospital network. Finally, who will be responsible for the result of the hospital? The governance of the hospital or the governance of the network? This question is not clear. And finally, the governance of the network today, it's not independent. It's a place to negotiate for the hospital and not a place to define and to decide the future of the network. So network governance, it's a delicate situation right now because we haven't changed the responsibility of the hospital. We just have created this new governance of the network. And we don't know what hospital will chair. We work in several projects of networks all around Belgium right now, and as we know, there is no chair service project for the moment. But in France, for example, in the GHT, Groupement Hospitalier Territorial, they start with the central purchasing, the coding. That means there is coder for all the network. They have all the same information system, and they also start with the training in this chair service. But today, in some of the projects that we are still working, network and different hospitals in the same network continue right now to purchase different system of information system. So how could we build a real network for our citizens if we are not able to start with this simple thing? Here is the question, no? So what to do? We should clearly define roles and responsibilities. We should develop synergy and joint projects. We can start with information system, with purchasing, and we may have an independent board of directors granting sustainability of our network. Thank you.
Thank you, Stéphane. that was really, really interesting. As you all know, I really love the picture with the chicken and the, no, not the egg, the chicken and the pork. So let's hear the point of view of a physician from Luxembourg, Dr. Michel Nathan. Were you a chicken or were you like a pork? Let's hear you about this. I am I'm waiting for your point of view, please.
I used to be a urologist. Okay, can I have my slides, please? Thank you for the invitation. Gilbert, to your question, how we see Belgium, as our politics copied some of your hospital law, we share the same problem. So I guess that's enough answer about governance. So what is ethics? What is ethics? Ethics is just in one sentence, if we can do it, should we do it, and the dilemma around all that. And what is a hospital? Our politicians and our public sometimes tends to forget the importance of hospitals and what would have been COVID without us, especially public hospitals. So we are there 24 hours for every problem and every complication. And so we are essential in the system. And that costs money. Without money, hospitals don't turn. And a good hospital costs a lot of money. And public hospitals need a lot of subsidiaries. And if you think you don't need it, just try without, and you see difference. But there are differences. And there are big differences between public and private structures. A public hospital assumes a larger social mission, the bulk of the training and the next generation of doctors and nurses, expensive healthcare procedures are done mostly in big public hospitals, and they have a downside that they have a lot of public and political influence in their government. So what is a hospital? A hospital is no company like another one. It's an expert organization. That means that a classical government just doesn't work. You cannot manage experts like you manage a hierarchy. You will not, the best manager in the world cannot tell his heart surgeon how to put in a heart valve. It's impossible. So we have to delegate that. And that means that these people had a lot of influence, a lot of power, and you are like a chef d'orchestre with a lot of solists who really don't really like to play in your orchestra, and you have to make them play in the orchestra to play good music. So decision-making process is also quite different than in companies. It's not hierarchical. It's made by doctors. The doctor induces every process. And as we heard in Chicago 3 years ago, the doctors are responsible for 88.8% of the expenses of your hospital, but without, you cannot run a hospital. So as a manager, you're sort of a Superman. You have to combine all this in your organization, and you have to make it run, and you have to watch for the bottom line. So what are your priorities? How do you think? Are that the human values? Are you considered responsible for a system as you're part of a system? Or are you just thinking of your organization and its success or its bottom line? So if you talk about ethics, many people tend to say that ethics is universal. That's not the case. I found this interesting chart of ethical values. You see somewhere in the middle, Belgium and Luxembourg are quite proximate one to another, but you see that even in Europe, we have different views of what is ethics and what are our values. And ethics without values is just nothing. So we have European values. If I listen to European institutions in Europe, healthcare is a value. It's based on solidarity and should be accessible and equal for every citizen. Even if the treaty, I guess it's Amsterdam, said it's a national consideration. It's a European value, access to healthcare. It's not shared by the USA and many Asian countries. But the manager, how is it with him? He has to think about other things than the patients. And how about the management of our institutions? Ethical dilemmas are frequent for the doctors, but they are equally frequent for the manager, and nobody speaks about it. So what is expected from us? First, it's the quality of care. Everybody likes to speak about quality. And if we speak about quality, what are we talking about? We talk about results, accessibility, empathy, how we deliver it, and patient safety. Then we have the other side, which is the societal quality of taking care, that every citizen gets the same access, the same chances, that we have the training of the next generations, and that we stand there and assume major catastrophes like COVID. Without hospital, it's not possible. And third, at last, assume your bottom line and assume that you don't write red numbers at the end of the year. So what is the role of the government? Why do you or do we pay taxes? I don't like to pay taxes, but what do I expect, on the other hand, from my state? I hope he assumes safety, assumes your public education and healthcare. That's why I pay taxes. That's what I consider the mission of a state. So I don't consider that my state can just outsource my public healthcare to the church or to any private company. And so in Europe, is that a moral value of the politics or not? If you listen to them, it is. If you see what they do, they expect it from us. So they expect that we do most with less. And money is always one of the challenges of the politics. So on one hand, politics tend to increase the demand. On the other, they tend to lower the offer. And we are just in the middle of that. And in public hospitals, we are very dependent of these public foundings. We are non-for-profit, and often we don't make profit. We don't know how to do it. It's impossible in our institutions. And on the other hand, we assume a lot of societal responsibilities. But private management methods, like in companies, do not work in public hospitals, or do work with very conflict situations. So what are you if you're a manager? You are like a farmer. You're a farmer with a farm of a lot of sacred cows. And you have to care for all these cows, your stakeholders, your politicians, your unions, your doctors, and you are not just free in managing your hospital, because all these sacred cows, you cannot take one to the butcher, otherwise you go. So it's very difficult to manage this farm. And the core question is, in Europe, how do we see ethics of healthcare? Can we see it for profit, or should it be non-for-profit? Normally, we would say healthcare should be for human, it's non-for-profit. And then I pose the question, is healthcare in Europe a market, or is it a right? If it's a right, it's not a market. If it's a market, it's not a right. So make your choice. But you can't have both at the same time, because the manager will not be able to assume both at the same time with the same efficiency. So how do you have to think if you are a manager? You have the both sides. I asked all my ministers since 20 years, should I think like a responsible person of the healthcare system and of the people, or am I just responsible for my company, my bottom line, my people? It's not the same. It could be very different. And you talked about networks. Try this in networks. If everybody just thinks of his company, not of the system, you go nowhere. And last not least, I like to keep my job. So I have to think so. Then there's an ethical question about incentives. Incentives is a very strong motor of the engine how companies work. If you pay for service, the people will work. But the consequences of incentives are very strong. They are equally for managers, for patients, and for doctors. So if you pay your doctors for incentives, they might take a little bit different decisions than if you pay them by the month. And in my idea, the question is not how much you pay the doctors. A good doctor should earn his life very comfortably, but how you pay him, for what? And this discussion has to be made. Well, that was the wrong button. Well, we talk about a lot about quality and about measures and objectivity and numbers. That's a tyranny of metrics or of numbers. If you put a number, everybody thinks that's a number, that's objective, that's right. Now, that means nothing, because professionals know perfectly how to trick the numbers. I give you an example of the heart surgery in the USA. There's an interesting paper about that, who said, well, if you measure the mortality of heart surgeons, they will game the system. They will tend to operate less sick patients. So you might have better results on the paper, but if you're really sick, you will get no operation because they will avoid the risk to treat you. So measures might be important. It's important to objectivate how much you can, but you always have to see what's behind and how they come and what is behind and how they're done. You need the specialist. A sterile number of saying something about hospital means nothing. And all this put us in dilemmas because we train the doctors as specialists of their job. They see themselves as advocates of the patient. We never train them as organization managers, so they don't understand us and we don't understand them. And that makes the conflict and makes hospital governance very difficult. The resulting conflict is daily. Managers are supposed to control expensive. Doctors are supposed to be the advocate of the patients, doing the best and often the most expensive. That's conflictual. And so the manager is between all of this. He has three very conflictual situations. He's supposed to invest, support spendings, but also cut the costs. And we have to see the opposite too. What is the good, the bad, and the ugly? A market situation might have also good sides. A market stimulates innovation and quality. That's clear. But it comes at a price. If you have a market, if you have a price, you must have a choice. And our patients do not have to choose between radical prostatectomy, a heart transplantation, or a new car. You don't have to make a choice for healthcare in Europe. And if you begin to make choices, it implies very hard ethical choices for professionals, for patients, and for managers. The vision of the consumer will be quite different. Our patients are accustomed to have free healthcare. So on one side, it's free. On one side, he doesn't want to pay a lot. He just wants to pay little, but he expects back a lot. Demand is infinite in healthcare. And on the other side, if he pays nothing, he does expect perfect treatment and accessibility. This is conflictual. So what can we ask from our politicians as managers? So what we can ask is, what are the values you want to be elected for? And then what do you expect from your healthcare system? Do you expect it to be open 24 hours, best quality, accessibility, and whatsoever what you promise every 4 or 5 years to your election people? Then give us the money and the regulations to do it. Not only increase the demand, also supply to the offer. And as we are in Brussels, you know, if you watch television, BBC, RTL, French television or German TV, it also don't say European Union says, they also say Brussels says. So as I'm speaking in Brussels, I put something about European values. And the question is, of the public hospital system, the cost of it is universal. Everywhere in Europe, people say it costs too much. But I say, what do you think would cost the opposite if you don't have a system that cares for public health care? What do you think what that would cost you politically? See the difference and don't complain all the time about the price of it. And see the absolute necessity of training and building new professionals for the next generation that hospitals do. See what you got when you had COVID without reserve. See, count the number of that without that. And if you want to defend the equality of citizens and human rights, well, then you have to finance the system. So what is the role of the hospital manager in all that? He has to defend the principal values of the hospital. But I think we have also to argue with universities to put in a module in the training of our doctors, and I mean the specialists, how does an organization work? What is an organization? And since the last generation of doctors don't have the training in philosophy that classical studies had, it lacks. See the emotional discussions when you are confronting your doctors. So the doctors don't understand us. Nobody told them what is an organization. They are trained as solists, and you ask them to play a symphony in an orchestra. They don't know how to do it. They just want to play their music. So please tell them how plays an orchestra. And this is what European Hospital Management Association must defend. So, to finish up, Justice says, l'accessoire suit le principal. Accessory questions follow the main. If you want a healthcare that works, first assume politically the values and the system that goes with it. And that's public system and public financing. This is the goal. And then, if you still have something to do, then there is a place also for a small market of offer, but not for the essential. This is only for the accessoire. And so watch your backbone, because without the backbone, the system will crumble. I thank you for your attention, and I hope that I manage my time. Gilbert, thank you.
Thank you, Michel. That was really inspiring for me. So you really brought us again to what is the value of our daily work, which is caring of people and not doing business. Let me invite all the speakers to the table to my right, and let me invite our vice chairman, Professor Verdonk, who will help me moderate these naughty people, if you are. Pascal, the first question is yours.
Good afternoon, everybody. And on behalf of the Belgium Association for Hospital Managers, I'd like to thank all the speakers for the excellent contribution and being present here with us for this important topic, not always sexy topic, but very important topic. We had different points of view, but nevertheless, when I was listening to this, I don't know why, but it's a male speaker group. I'm a little bit, let's say, confused about definitions. In my opinion, and please correct me, doing the right things, that's leadership. And doing things right, it's management. And governance is about roles and responsibilities and how you describe it, for instance, in a charter. So is that not more than just doing the right things? That's, we mixed a little bit within the different presentations, leadership, management, and governance. Or am I too severe in my analysis by listening to all contributions? It's just to put the legend correctly, that we have a take-home message. Who likes to react, please?
Yeah, maybe quickly. Obviously, we didn't have a lot of time to go into depth and to indeed the different roles of the many governance organs. So it's indeed correct. For example, if we talk about strategy and the role of doctors in strategy, it's quite obvious that the initiative comes from the management, and that then in consultation with the board of directors, the ambition and the goals are being put forward. So each actor has his or her role. Of course, in hospitals, you add what we would call the fourth pillar, because in a classical governance structure, you have the shareholders or members, if it's a non-profit organization, board of directors and management, and then in hospitals, the fourth pillar, which is the medical staff, in many cases personified by the medical council, and on that point, I think a lot of work still has to be done to indeed clearly define the role that should be accounted to this group. And I think with our presentation, we try to put forward a number of reflections, possibly this tripartite consultation group to develop strategy, etc.
I was very pleased with your approach, or the approach of GUBERNA, the way you presented it together, you both, about co-governance model with clinicians, especially in the private model. We come to the public hospital later on, but especially in the private model. You really was an advocate for it, but you didn't mention it towards the clinical network. Is that a necessary condition? Because my experience, I've worked in hospitals where co-governance exists already for more than 20 years. It is very powerful. In fact, for me, it's a necessary condition to be innovative, because without the clinicians, you cannot really innovate your healthcare processes. But that's built on one individual hospital. But if we consider to the health and the future of health, you have to do it together, and let's stay within the hospital. And then the clinical network, do you have experience, or do you read about it during your research about the importance of co-governance with the medical staff for being a successful clinical network in the future? I don't know who would take it.
Yeah, I think it's quite obvious that that co-governance has a crucial role to play also at network level. I think there is no discussion on that. I think the fact is, or the facts are, as also explained by the other speakers, that these networks they are really still in their, what we call in Dutch, kinderschoenen. So they're really they still have to develop. They are still starting. Yes. Exactly. So we focus now still more on these individual hospitals, which it can be that it's already developed for years, but still in many other cases we see that hospitals struggle with the adequate role of doctors in their governance. But indeed, of course, it will also have to be developed at the network level. I don't know if there's other input from.
Before I give the word to Dr. Bejjani again, because then we talk about doctors and so on, I first like to hear Vidal. I was impressed by your presentation, and the presentation. Nee, he's not yet here, or he will come. Then I keep my question for him. I will see him on the screen. Okay, so then I give the floor to you in a co-leadership.
Thank you, co-leadership.
Co-leadership.
I have one question for all of you. I've heard a lot about non-profit organization, about co-governance, about the place, the engagement of physician, okay, like the PIG. And I didn't hear a lot about how we could imagine empowerment of patients, of citizens as payers of our system, as you said, Michel, in the governance of hospital. can we imagine that somehow in Belgium, maybe in practical or by changing the law? I would feel a challenging question is the insurers, the mutualization, welcome in the boards of every hospital in order to bring the opinion and the place of their members, which are citizens and patients. What do you feel about these questions, all of you? Thank you.
I'm agree with you, Gilbert, and I think we have to. It's what I say. We have to integrate the perspective of them, not an association of patients or something like that, because you know what will happen. But this perspective. So yes.
Michel was not really agreeing. If I can read the body expression.
I see two aspects. The first aspect of the insurer would be that he will be sort of the watchdog if the doctor becomes too expensive or it's a bad doctor. As you see in some American managed systems, he will come to see the manager and say, either you take off the doctor or you lose your contract. And this is a very powerful argument. On the other hand, in our solidarity systems, the insurance are most often considering themselves as public payers and not as an insurer. It's some public institution.
What I call insurer in Belgium is the public payers.
Okay, so the public payer, he is a part of the system. And he is a part of the plan. And if the plan says as much millions, he will try to keep it as much millions. So it might have just the opposite effect of what you expect.
Okay, just to continue the same idea, I heard also a lot. Sorry, maybe you could answer both.
Okay.
So it will be yours after. I heard also a lot about accountability, and this was also something you pointed out at GUBERNA. Do you really feel that in Belgium, our boards, our governance in hospitals is really accountable for the decisions they take? It could be through like pay for quality, alternative models of payment, or some other way of bringing incentives and maybe some sanctions. So what about this accountability in also our system? So you could answer accountability and the place of the payers, please, Corentin or Ewout.
Yes, just to come back. Yes, I think there is a question about the inclusiveness of the stakeholders and including passion, but you need before think about what is the role of the board and what do you expect of the board, because you can include the patient, you can include I don't know, suppliers, but the idea is to have an efficient board, and if you come with patient, with supplier.
So you bring him and you define his role in the board.
Yes, okay. Basically. And about the accountability, maybe it's a little bit technical for me, and I think maybe.
I mean, does our leaders in hospitals, yes, the board, the presidents, and all the board members, are they really responsible of what they're doing? In the light that it is public money, it's our taxes, as you said, Michel, and it's also our health and our care. So, yes. Do you feel it's the case? If not, what should we do?
Yes, but basically there is a law. The all directors have a part of responsibility. So we often advise to all board members to have an insurance, because the risk is really big, and it's clear they have to keep in mind. But at what we've seen, the commitment of directors, of major directors, is often big. Of course, there is always the question about the public directors with a commitment that can be different, but yes, I don't know.
Ewout, you wanted to add something, maybe?
Yeah, maybe I think, of course, you can set up certain legal frameworks, etc. But I think I'm not sure about their added value. I think you should more depart from the people and their sense of responsibility and commitment, which can, of course, be supported and stimulated through an adequate selection process for professional board members, where you focus not only on the hard skills, I think it was mentioned, legal, etc., but also on the more soft skills like professional behavior, etc. Like it was also a main point in our presentation, that is professional governance behavior as a sine qua non if you want to play any kind of role in the governance of a hospital.
Michel, and then a question from Pascal. What do you think about this?
Well, I don't know exactly the Belgian political situation. I just wrote an article about 50 years of hospital development in Luxembourg. And I looked at the debate at the Chambre des Députés. And what I find that the last real debate, what we expect from a hospital and from a system and how it should be organized, was in 1976. Since all the hospital plans were about, we have too many beds, how do we bring hospital together, and so on. And no real political decision, no real political goals or aims. We are experts and professionals of hospitals. So if a politician comes to see us and says, I want concentration, I want as much, I know how to do it and what not to do. But this is not what he will say. If I understand what's happening about here, is you cannot decide we have too many hospitals, so please be together and make a réseau hospitalier, and they will regulate themselves. The Germans tried it with the DRG system, and it's a catastrophe, actually. They also have to change the law. So that's why I say politics should first discuss what are the values. Second, what are the goals? We know how to take these goals, but I don't understand the goals. It's too many beds, not enough beds. Is it accessibility?
Some goals.
Or is it concentration? Having both at the same time with few people, be it 6 million or 600,000, is very difficult.
Thank you, Michel. Vidal is with us. Please, Pascal.
Welcome again, Vidal. Part of the Q&A. You missed, of course, a part of the Q&A, but not important. I have a question for your excellent lecture and contribution. Specifically, you introduced, of course, the VUCA concept and how we have to behave in that uncertain, complex world by having a vision, understanding that world, acting in a clear way and being agile, and what the role is of governance to realize that. But what would, if you summarize in a take-home message for the audience, the top of license governance for the medical doctors who didn't participate, and even the board members generically this afternoon, how would you sell that concept to them? What is the convincing argument?
So I think that there are three things that are potentially persuasive, but not for all clinicians at all times. So the first is that the healthcare and governance will always have an accountability component to the work that we do. In no small part because the care we deliver, whether or not we do a good job or bad job, has an impact on people's lives. And so clinicians spend their entire professional careers learning about and understanding clinical evidence and clinical protocol. And that always has to be interwoven into the plans. And to the extent that we can elevate those conversations and connect the organizational design, the policy, and the law to clinical care delivery, I think you have one angle that is incredibly important. So that's as a clinician. As a professional, clinicians are attracted to the role in no small part because they are highly intelligent individuals who get a lot of energy and excitement from taking very complex things and coming to clear answers. I think that is very much a part of what the governance work should do. And to the extent that you can identify clinicians who are actively interested in unpacking and solving other parts of problems that are organizational in nature, I think you have another key element that can be successful. And of course, the third is the elevation of the clinical, the patient's voice and patient's experience. So we've seen this happen in multiple different ways using avatars or representative patients, but this is also a place where clinicians understand the experience and can bring some additional context by being an advocate for the patient in these conversations that will have impacts on them over time.
Thank you very much for a clear response. I have an interesting question for the audience, and I don't know if you're willing, or our panel, if you're willing to answer or able to answer, because there's a question: is there a shortage of directors in the Belgium hospitals?
What can you?
The shortage of directors, administrateurs, délégués.
Not enough.
We always speak about shortage of nurses and so on, but now the question is there a shortage of directors? Someone able to answer, or maybe Gilbert?
That's impossible. There's too many hospitals, so maybe we should go to networks, and for networks you need less hospital managers, maybe with subcommittees, and as we have seen today with groups like the Golden Group in Wales, the Golden and the Silver and the Bronze one. So you need maybe more people into management, but maybe less leaders on top. We have too many leaders, my opinion.
Yeah, maybe I have a little bit different opinion about it. But first, reaction.
Yeah, but we will have 25 leaders, no?
Well, that's just a point. What I would react on that interesting question, never thought about it, is I think we have selected people in the hospitals to run a hospital in one or another position, for instance, CEO or CMO of one hospital. And suddenly during the trajectory, you're changing towards a clinical network. And you have shown very nice numbers about the financial responsibility and so on. From leadership point of view, it needs, in fact, leaders from another level. That can be, of course, those same individuals who are becoming more mature and evaluating. It's not about the present people, but you need another type of leadership to manage such a network on such a scale than just the individual hospital. And from that, I like to bring a couple of things during the discussion together. We have to form those people. Of course, you can take away those people from industry who have the experience and so on, multi-site management, different cultures, all bringing together. But not everybody is willing to jump then to the healthcare, into the jungle of healthcare. It needs some time to become familiar with it and to be able to survive there. So you cannot lose that time while you're in the position. So you must be able to start somewhere. And I think we have to invest in that, because even if you would go to 25 networks and so on, to find 25 people who are able really to lead that in social service for the community and so on, whoa, that's really choosing the best ones. And it needs time, and that's not just something that is available by just sending an announcement for a new job.
So we lack very good hospital managers with experience and with a level of excellence that is still to be achieved. That's correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, especially in the evolution and the new requirements, and from society and from a content's point of view. Vidal,
last question for me.
you have experience from an international point about that, leadership and governance, and then the right leaders?
So I think you touched on the answer that I would have given, which is I think we in healthcare are always oriented towards a technical ratio of the numbers of inputs to achieve the output. And what I would point to, again, referencing this idea of VUCA, is we want a wider breadth of expertise and capabilities within our leadership, and whether or not that is housed in one individual or across multiple individuals, I think is a real outstanding question. What I can tell you we're seeing happening around the world now is in these boards, an increasing desire to open the ranks to include people who come from outside of healthcare, but who might have experience in scenario planning, futurism, deep technical expertise on outside of the clinical world to augment our capabilities. And I think the other point that I hope kind of came through in the work is that we need to support people who participate in these kind of governance arrangements to come to the right decision. So there needs to be a lot more infrastructure around information gathering, synthesis, templates, tools to come to these answers that I don't think we've traditionally done a very good job on, because largely what we've been looking for is, have we hit our clinical metrics? Have we hit our financial metrics? And have we stayed out of the news? And I think that's not the mindset that we should be having around governance going forward.
Vidal, I don't know if you heard about what's happening in Belgium, and it's also a question for speakers in here. They went through this reflection and ideas about co-governance, which is a way of saying let's empower physicians in hospitals, and which is good. But since, let's say, till now, physicians' power was a financial way of issue of doing, and now we are really speaking on a way of bringing them into decisions. So what they decided is one physician, one in the board. After all I heard today, that seems not a lot, and in same time, maybe not really precise or specified in order to bring a physician who has this large view on things. What do you think about what's happening? Are we ready in Belgium? Are we mature enough to go further, or is it a problem?
So I will fully confess that the experience in terms of restructuring governance in healthcare across the institutions that I track very closely would tend to point to things moving very, very slowly, very, very painfully, and I think largely over the last 18 months, probably come to a standstill as we developed or had to address the pandemic. So the evidence base that I would be drawing from, admittedly, is very, very small and very, very narrow. What I mostly see as happening is two divergent risks that you introduced in this kind of concept. The first is, by only having one physician at the table, that person largely just gets outvoted depending on how the voting structure or the decision-making structure is established within the committee or the governance group. And so that can be exhausting, because it feels like, despite the conviction that physician might have about what we do, I'm just here as a placeholder, or as a signal that we're considering clinician voice, but we're not actually delivering on it. The second option is, you say, we really do want to bring to bear clinician expertise in all the decisions we make, but we only have one person, so we exhaust their time by asking them to do and weigh in on so many different committees that we end up exhausting this very finite and very valuable resource. And so I can see those being the two tracks, and so how you establish yourself in that Goldilocks middle is particularly challenging. But the two things I will say that we have seen be helpful is you need to resource that individual to make and participate in the board effectively. Simply because they are a clinician or a physician does not necessarily mean that they're going to be able to have the necessary resources to take advantage of their role and responsibility. And the second is to be very clear about what are the decisions we want to have at the governance level. And I would say even in the beginning, we need to be inventorying all the complex decisions that we need to be responsible for before we even start thinking about the composition of our board.
So it would be the same as Pascal said, like for managers, it should be someone with knowledge, with expertise, and with a sufficient, how do you say it? Formation? Background, yeah, in order to have this role. Anyone want to comment on this? And that was my last question. Yes. Before our drink.
I think that the training of doctors should include, like the engineering schools, a management component. It's very important for every doctor, because if you train only a few, his colleagues won't understand him. That's very important.
With those wise words, I'd like to thank everybody for the preparation, the contribution. I received some messages, text messages, while we are doing the Q&A. Don't run away, I give you the last word. While we are doing the Q&A, that we were exemplary in exercising in a kind of co-governance between doctors, medical board, and governors. So I give you the last word.
Well, the last word is always the same. It's about partnership and respect. And I really feel that in our health system, partnership with everyone, which also includes co-creation, is something really important, and respect, which means we really need everyone and each one to achieve our mission. And Michel, you also spoke about that. We need to do it together. Thank you, all of you, and join us for a drink. And for the others and the audience, we were really happy of sharing all this knowledge with you. Thank you also, Vidal from London. And I hope that you had at least one take-home message for everyone. Thank you, and see you soon, of course. Ciao, ciao.